Hey guys, subscribe for daily content. And if you're shopping for gear, make sure you check out the description for the newest items at some of the very best online retailers. There's also links for some of the items that I personally recommend. Thanks!
What's going on YouTube? Metal Complex here, and today I've got another interesting knife review / knife overview to share with you guys. This is the Red Horse Knives War Pig. This is the newest version of this knife. This knife is available right now, and I'll link it right down in the description. It does come in a few different configurations, so if you're not into this exact look, there's a couple of different options. It does help my channel when you use those links, but that's entirely up to you. Thanks so much to Red Horse Knives for supplying this knife for review. Thanks to my patrons for supporting me, and please make sure to follow me on Instagram at metal_complex. It's been a while since I've taken a look at something from Red Horse. The Hellraiser is the one that I am super familiar with. But this is, I believe, the third model. I actually used to own one of the American mid-techs a while back that I really very much enjoyed. That's actually owned by one of my local buddies here now. But anyways, let's go ahead and measure this knife. The overall length of the War Pig is coming in at just, it's 8 inches on the dot, maybe 7.9. Blade length is about 3.35. Cutting edge is just shy of 3 1/4. Let's go ahead and do some size comparisons up against the Demco 8010 and 8020.5. You can see here, it's a fairly big knife. It's not quite as big and robust as the 8010. Let's put it up against the Spyderco PM2 and the Spyderco Para 3. Absolutely, once again, well, I was about to say in between. It's positioned in between the knives, but it's more about the same size as the PM2, just slightly shorter. But I should point out that it's only a little bit more cutting edge, honestly. Definitely feels like a larger knife, though. And then finally, let's put it up against the Benchmade Griptilianer, in this case, the Ritter Hogue and the Hogue Deca. The War Pig is the closest in overall length and profile to the Ritter Hogue, but obviously it's got its own thing going on. How's the action on this knife? First of all, this particular variant is manufactured in China. Now, I'm uncertain exactly who the OEM is. It could be QSP, it could be Bestech, right? It could be We Knives. I mean, there's a lot of different options there, and frankly, they all do excellent work, and this doesn't feel like, anything that, it doesn't feel like it's being made by some unknown Chinese OEM. It feels like it's being made by one of the premium Chinese OEMs. Honestly, the action's good. The detent feels slightly weak considering the flipper tab is so big. This feels like a knife that should have a heavier detent and that doesn't require as much light switch force, but for some reason it has a detent that feels light. I'm not gonna call it a light detent because I think there's just a lot of blade and I'm getting maybe so much leverage on the flipper tab that or the flipper tab is so big that I'm expecting to get more leverage on it or something. Truthfully, the detent feels, maybe if I feel it here, that feels about medium, right? I just want it to be heavier. Now, that's for the flipper tab. If you use the hole, it's funny enough, almost impossible to reverse flick, and that's because the hole is positioned so high. Now, the only way that I can do it is if I use the meat of my finger instead of my fingernail, and instead of flipping upwards like this, I almost have to flip straight out. Then I can get it. But it's awkward, and honestly, I feel like that hole there, which actually works plenty well if you use your thumb like this, I kind of wish the whole thing was just moved back a bit and maybe this swoop didn't start, but that's pretty nitpicky because that assumes that those statements assume that everybody who buys a knife that has a hole in it absolutely must be able to reverse flick it, and I know plenty of you do, because when you see a hole, you think Spyderco, and when you think Spyderco, you think reverse flick, right? So this is really only a nitpick for people who expect to be able to very conveniently reverse flick it. It is not super easy or super convenient to reverse flick. This way and the flipper tab are the easiest, but nothing feels absolutely perfect. It all feels okay at best. Access to the lock bar is great, and there's nowhere near any double clutch. That's something good about this design, the massive flipper tab. When you move that lock bar out of the way, you're given a massive safety zone. There's basically no chance your thumb is gonna miss that flipper tab, or the flipper tab is gonna miss your thumb rather, and the thing's gonna come down on your hand because the action is very smooth but very controlled, and that flipper tab creates the safety zone. So that's nice. Let's go ahead and do carry profile. Thickness up against the Spyderco Para 3. This guy's a little bit thicker, actually quite a bit thicker than the Para 3. It's a fairly robust knife, designed that way on purpose. As far as I can remember, the War Pig is always, in fact, Red Horse knives in general have always been pretty robust. Up against the PM2 and Para 3 for length and height. This was a big boy carrying it around. I was very aware that it was tall. And from the flipper tab to the peak of that horn, I mean, it really, the whole thing looks like a rhinoceros. Much more like a rhinoceros than maybe when they say War Pig, maybe they were going like, you know, hog with tusks, kind of, because it's kind of got that look, I guess. But the rhinoceros horn or snout here creates a massive height to the blade. And you'll be aware of that in the pocket. You'll be aware that the thing's tall. It's not necessarily a massively thick or massively heavy knife, right? But the element that is cumbersome slightly, not, you know, irredeemably, but slightly is just the height, the distance between the flipper tab and the maximum height here. It just creates for a wide object and is noticeable, substantially more noticeable than something like the PM2 or Para 3. Let's go ahead and weigh it. What are we looking at for materials here? We have a satin polished S35 VN blade. By the way, these blades are numbered and limited for the run. I would venture to guess he'll continue to do different runs of these, but for this run, they are limited to how many pieces? I honestly don't know. Titanium, and then we have carbon fiber. In this case, they do come with G10 also for a little bit less money. So yeah, that's what we're looking at here. Then titanium for the clip and a titanium backspacer. The weight on this guy comes in at 4.97 ounces. If you look these up on DLT, which is where I have them linked, at least one of the listings lists it as 9 ounces. That is wrong. It's clearly just an error on DLT's website. If you look this up and you're like, oh my God, 9 ounces. It's not 9 ounces. It's about 4.9 ounces, which is fairly heavy, but not monstrously heavy for sure. The balance on this guy is coming in, honestly, right behind the pivot. Yeah, it's very well balanced. It's just so the awkwardness is really just in the dimensions, right? Which, well, when I say it's just the shape and honestly the closed profile of the knife is the awkward area there. Let's go ahead and get out my tools. My tools are very inexpensive and very recommendable. You can find them right down in the section of my description that talks about the tools I use on this channel. Really, these tools are great. I mean, I don't know if I talk about it enough, but like if you're wondering like what tools should I buy to maintain my pocket knives, this will do like 95% of it. These are awesome. Sometimes, you know, knives have they require different bits and things like that, but most of the time this will get you by. So what we have here is actually, I think, T8 across the board. Yeah, that is the case. We have 3 T8 screws on this side and 3 T8 screws on this side, and that's to keep these scales attached to the liner, or the frame rather, down here. Then we have the 2 screws holding in the backspacer and then 2 screws for the pocket clip. More than minimal hardware, but at least they're not T6. I really don't care that much. As long as it's T8 or more and you have the right tools for the job. Well, truthfully, if you have the right tools for the job, T6 you'll still work it, but I prefer T8 or larger for fastener size because they're just less likely to strip, right? Even with the best tools on the planet, the T8s and above are better. Anyways, the hardware is easy to remove, and it shouldn't cause much of a problem. Let's go ahead and measure the blade stock thickness because it is fairly robust. My guess is that is about 155 thousandths. Let's measure that up here. Oh my God, I'm right on the money. It actually doesn't happen very often. If you're watching this for the first time and you're like, he measured it before the video, most of the time I guess that I'm wrong. But that just really looked like the, ZT0562 thickness to me. Anyways, let's move into the meat and potatoes. Man, what a weird looking knife. Yeah, actually the War Pig has been around for a bit. I want to say the first time I saw this knife was somewhere around 2015. Maybe I'm wrong, but it could actually be older than that. But I think the first time I saw it was right around there. Now back then, I think these were American mid-techs. These are now this particular version. I don't know if they still make an American custom version of this knife or not, but this particular version is manufactured in China. Everything has gotten absurdly expensive. So making exactly the same knife now that they used to make here in the United States would cost a lot more money. And that's part of the reason why you're not seeing that as much, because people just don't have $600, $700, $800, $900 to spend on a pocket knife, right? It's really easy to take the position of everybody's greedy and everybody's trying to rip my face off. Like, I mean, that requires absolutely no research, right? It makes you sound like you know what you're talking about, but realistically, it means I didn't do any research and I'm really, really angry and I want to blame somebody, right? Ask yourself. That's what that means. In reality, what we have now are American companies that simply cannot keep up with demand, and even if they could, the prices would be so high it would just piss everybody off. A lot of these companies, not everybody, I know that whole speech that I just gave will undeniably stir up a firestorm in the comments, right? Sure, let's go. It's the truth, right? But I know that people get riled up. What happens now is we've got companies that are manufacturing some things using an OEM in China to get the price down for people who are not bothered by that. There will always be people who are bothered by that. And for people who are bothered by that, you have a lot of other options, a lot of other expensive options, but you do have other options, right? For people who are not bothered by it, you can save some money sometimes by buying these designs that are authorized to be manufactured in China by a different OEM. That's what's going on here. Now, that being said, the price on this is still very high, right? And we'll talk about that price tag. But let's talk about the design first off. It's honestly pretty comfortable. It's not the most miraculously comfortable thing I've ever held in my life, but the lines don't really make sense until you pick it up, right? You look at it and you're like, wow, that is really weird. And then you pick it up and you go, oh, well, okay, that kind of makes sense now. I can't say that these edges are perfectly done and that everything feels perfectly comfortable. And truth be told, this pocket clip is pretty big and it extends past the halfway point on the handle. So you feel it more in the middle of your hand when you squeeze. So even though it is actually slightly contoured and rounded off at the end, you're still very much aware that it's there. I'm not saying it's like, oh my God, ow, my hand, I have to go to the hospital. I'm saying it's, yeah, I know that pocket clip is there. And if I'm going to use this for an extended period of time without gloves, you're definitely going to notice this part right here. Outside of that, though, I mean, truthfully, the fit and finish is good. It's just there's some design awkwardness, but the fit and finish, the execution of this is very, very good. There aren't really any flaws anywhere in terms of machining. There's just little nitpicks I have, I guess, with the design. The belt satin finish is a little bit underwhelming. I would have preferred a different finish. This just kind of looks like a basic, almost. I'm going to be real with you. Part of the reason I don't like the satin finishes is because it shows where there are imperfections that are just sort of par for the course with this type of finish. When you do this, you see little zones that have more or less of the consistent polishing. It also, if you're wondering, like, why does it look a little bit yellowy? It's not my camera. It actually has that look because of what I assume is like belt burn. If you look at something like of course, the one knife that would give me, here we go. This Spyderco PM2 is a little bit less yellowy. It's a little more white, right? And that's because there aren't really any burn lines on there. But sometimes with this finish, you get a little bit of a slight golden or yellowy hue. And I have to assume it's just because steel changes color when there's lots of friction built up, right? Some areas look a little bit less even than others. And truthfully, it's just not my favorite finish for a lot of those reasons, right? Now, it looks okay. It looks pretty good. I mean, not necessarily a whole lot different than other, people making, like, or other OEMs doing, the same finish, right? But it's just, for this reason, it's my least favorite finish. I like a tumbled finish, or I like a hand rub satin finish, or I like something that's coated or tumbled coated or is vapor blasted or glass blasted, because you end up with a much more even finish that doesn't have slight, flaws or discoloration or anything like that. So that's a personal thing. But if this finish doesn't bother you, if there's nothing here that's bothering you, then go ahead. You're all right. This has a slight recurve to it, which is fine. It's not something that I love because it creates a little bit more of a tricky situation when you're resharpening it. And that's actually made more complicated by the fact that we have a compound blade. So this area right here, you can see the final bevel actually changes just a little bit as we transition from this edge, which is thinner, to this edge, which is thicker. It's really cool to look at. And what purpose does it serve? I don't know. I guess you could create some hair splitting, literally, arguments for specific circumstances where this compound grind would be ideal. Truthfully, I don't know when that would be the case, right? Probably very specific outdoor scenarios. But this knife is more than likely going to be purchased by people. I mean, the overwhelming majority of people who are going to pick this knife up are people who are probably just going to carry and use it for regular stuff, and they just like how it looks. And there's nothing wrong with that, right? It's not necessarily thin behind this edge, even though that is the thinnest edge. It's not really all that thin, but it will cut and slice well enough for general tasks. It does have a tip, right? The flat looks nice. In fact, most of the personality for this knife is in the blade, and that's something that I should credit this knife with. Is I know what the Warpig looks like because it is so wildly different. There's a lot of other knives out there that have a hole and have a compound blade and have kind of this, but I'm always able to identify the Warpig for what it is because it's just that. It's got a really unique look to it. There's nothing else on the market that's exactly like this, and maybe I just remember it because it was like a core memory of my knife journey, right? This was still fairly early on in my journey through being a knife enthusiast, and I remember being attracted to the Warpig and the Hellraiser, and then there was another one there. But I can always identify this knife, right? So it does have a lot of personality. There's not a lot going on with the handle scales. I think it's just maybe the extreme curvature. I say extreme. I'm making it real dramatic. Not really. It's just the shape of the handle in combination with the blade that helps me identify it. But outside of that, it's really just a simple faux bolster. It's not a separate piece because this is all actually the frame with a piece of carbon fiber on it. And by the way, the transition from the titanium to the carbon fiber is great, and the carbon fiber is very high quality. It looks really good, none of that shiny crap. It is also contoured, which I should point out there. Got some jimping back here, and you got a nice little place for your thumb if you really want to come up here and do that. But this flipper tab is so huge, you are quite a ways from the cutting edge. I mean, you are a long ways from the cutting edge. And while there is technically room to choke up here, that's a pretty dangerous place to put your index finger. I wouldn't do it. You have a little bit of a sharpening choil there, and you know the edge bevel is done evenly, and it is done intentionally. You know, it's a little bit different here, that transition, that's done intentionally, and it's the same on both sides, so that's good. It says Red Horse Knives right here, and on the other side it says S35VN, which is fine, right? A lot of people are going to say, for that much money, it should be M390. That's not how that works. M390 is in the same tier as far as super steels go. M390 is also very old. It's very old. It used the origins of M390 is all the way back to Duratec 20CV. So if we're going to go by length of time that it's been around, M390 is super old. S35EN is a crucible steel, meaning it's powder formed and just has a different composition, where the balance, the multi-directional teeter-totter is simply different. M390 is more stainless and has a better potential level of edge retention, but S35VN is tougher and is definitely easier to touch up, and for that reason I personally prefer S35VN. There is a very, very small difference in terms of what it costs to buy these steels. Like if you're Red Horse or the OEM and you're trying to buy S35VN from Crucible or M390 from Boulder, there's very little difference in terms of the cost. The reason people automatically assume M390 is more premium is because it has slightly better potential edge retention, and a lot of people just automatically and blindly assume that edge retention is king and is of the utmost value and should be considered above all other things, which is simply not true. S35VN is fine on this knife, and the pricing is it's not the steel that's the problem, it's the pricing on this knife, in my opinion. That's the problem. So changing it to M390 would not suddenly make the price justified. No. But I'll remind people, you can get knives in 20CV and M390 for under $100. So we got to stop reducing. I say this periodically because there's still people who need to understand this. We've got to stop reducing the value or the perceived value of these objects to simply the materials used to create them. It is one factor, a factor that should be considered, but it is simply one factor in the grand scheme of everything that's involved with, pricing these things out. Anyways, thanks for the speech. Sorry. Anyways, we have a backspacer, full titanium backspacer. It's worth noting. You have a milled titanium pocket clip, and honestly, in and out of the pocket, this wasn't a problem. The only issue I had personally was that the pocket clip just seemed really big. It was just always like every time I held this thing before using it, I was like, man, that pocket clip is there. Wow. But it works. Functionally, I think it's fine. There is a lock bar insert doubling as the over travel stop, so that's great. You also have a stop pin located in its traditional position with tons of shouldering, open and closed. No blade play up, down, left to right, no lock stick, no double clutch, no pivot lash. Very smooth and very consistent in here. And honestly, again, like I said, a medium strength detent. The knife is perfectly centered with no detent lash. Fit and finish wise, it's all fine except for a few inconsistencies in the blade finish. I think that the knife is very recognizable and has a lot of personality. I'll never forget what the War Pig looks like. And, you know, cool factor for people who are into this look. Yeah, it's oozing with cool factor for sure. Ergonomics are surprisingly decent. I don't know why I expected them to not be good. I guess it just looks like a knife that's not going to be comfortable, and it is for the most part fairly comfortable. I think the materials are all appropriate for the premium production Chinese territory that this is supposed to be in. My problem is with the final price tag. The least expensive version of this knife is in G10 titanium and S35VN, and it's coming in at $345. Now, I know I just gave you a speech about materials not being the only factor to consider when it comes to pricing. That is absolutely true. There's lots of other factors. One of those factors includes competition, specifically competition making essentially the exact same type of thing with the exact same level of execution in the exact same part of the world, right? The truth is that this knife has a lot of competition, and a lot of that competition comes in at like $100 less on the higher end. This is cool, and it is contoured. We should point that out. Contoured titanium. That's a little more expensive to do than flat titanium, even in China, right? This is not Chinese S35VN. This is S35VN, meaning it comes from Crucible, meaning it comes from the United States, right? It's S35VN. Titanium pocket clip, titanium backspacer. That's all great, but again, there are plenty of companies making, you know, the same type of stuff with the same types of materials with the same levels of execution for like $100 less. I honestly don't know why this knife is priced so high. Some of the stuff that you can get from China that's using the same materials, which again is just one factor, but some of that stuff has wildly more exotic execution, wildly different machining lines. We have very unique texturing, anodizing, you know, much more complicated, you know, machining. A great example would be like stuff from Maxace or Reich. Holy moly. That stuff is much, much more complicated. And it's not just like more complicated in terms of how it looks. It takes more work to machine that type of stuff, right? So I think the knife is fine. I think you really have to love this design to want to buy it. And you really have to love the design to buy it for a bare minimum of $345. It actually costs you more money to buy it with carbon fiber. It's a cool knife. And, you know, honestly, I got this knife for free. And honestly, if you click on those links in the description for this knife and you buy it, I'll get a commission, right? So in the spirit of continuing to be honest with you guys, even though I stand to benefit from giving this thing a positive review, I don't think this is a very good purchase. It's a cool knife, and I wish it was less expensive. Honestly, if it came in at about $250, I'd say, yeah, knock yourself out. If you like the look of it, it's cool, right? It's got a lot of personality. But at $345, I just feel like it's overpriced. So I do appreciate Red Horse Knives for sending this in. This will likely end up being a giveaway item on one of my live streams. But I do think it's cool, and I love playing with it, and I enjoyed carrying it simply for the nostalgia. Because this was, again, it was one of those knives that I was like, you know, drooling over in you know, the earlier years of my knife enthusiast journey. So Red Horse Knives does make some really, really cool stuff, though, and I think that their pricing on some of their other stuff is spot on. This one just didn't quite do it for me. That's going to be pretty much it today, guys. Please make sure to follow me on Instagram at metal_complex. If you enjoyed this video, leave a like. If you'd like to check out my other content, I do, of course, have lots of videos of knives that are either expensive or inexpensive that I do or don't like, so check those out. And if you enjoy all my content, go ahead and click on that Metal Complex logo right there and subscribe because there's definitely more coming. Thanks again for watching, everybody, and have a great day.